Hello, in this video we will talk about one of the special Spark Forms Builder controls, which is the XML Connector control, and how to use it in your SharePoint forms. The XML Connector control is designed to integrate your form with an external or internal XML data source, XML string stored in SharePoint columns, or InfoPath forms. This control is very helpful for SharePoint environments that heavily depend on InfoPath forms, and need a way to retrieve the important information that resides inside these XML data source files. And you can create cascading XML connector controls, based on parent-child XML data source structure, using the XML connector control, and Spark Forms Builder internal functions. Integrating your list or library with other external or internal XML data sources, and populating their data to your form has become a very easy task. You just need to drag the control, configure it, and build a simple rule to populate the retrieved data to your form's controls. Let's add the XML connector control to this form. From the list at the top, click on Spark Forms Builder to open the canvas to design the form. As you see here, I've previously designed this form to add the XML connector in it. If you are interested in how to customize the design for the form in detail, you can watch the tutorial video listed in the description below. From the Toolbox panel, under Integration, drag and drop the XML connector control. Modify the XML connector control properties. From Control Settings, we are going to connect the XML connector control with the XML data source that we want to retrieve the data from. As we see here, in the XML dialog setting window, you can connect to the XML data source from an external or internal URL that the XML is stored in, or a column string stored in a SharePoint list with an XML structure, or an XML file stored in a SharePoint library. For now, we are going to select Library XML file, enter the site path, and select the list that the XML file stored in it. Enter the item ID for the XML file, as it is in the SharePoint library. You can only read XML data from specific item in the library. You can add its static value, or the value for any form control, or variable. If you want to exclude the XML namespace, you can select it. Enter this path of the XML. This path can contain static values, form variables, or form controls values to reform a dynamic filter. Type the primary node that you want to retrieve data in the form based on it. Here we are going to type item. As we see here, we have two types of XML structure, multiple column source, and single column source. The multiple column source will translate the XML structure into a multiple column in the search dialog, while the single column source will translate the XML structure into a single column in the search dialog. Choose the type based on your XML data source structure. If you want to show only unique values of retrieved results, and prevent duplicates, select distinct values. One of the XML connector control advanced features is that you can bind and represent the data according to your selection and configuration. You can choose to render the control to be a searchable dialog, checkbox list, drop-down list, or even a radio buttons list control. We will see these cases together. First, we will select the searchable type. We have here a checkbox to display all the data in the search dialog. If the search box is empty or not, we are going to select it, and see how it works. Then click on OK. Now let's map the XML connector control with the SharePoint field, to save the control's value in the SharePoint list alongside the other data. OK, after configuring the XML connector control, we are going to use the Generate XML Data function, to retrieve all the related data, like the manufacturer, the model, and the cost for the selected item, by the XML connector and set them in the form controls. To add the function we have to add a rule first, select the item control. Then, from the top ribbon, click on the control rules. Create a new rule. Modify the rule name. Select Rule Type Action, and apply the rule on change. Then add the condition that will apply the function only. If there is an item. In the action text box, we are going to add the GetXMLData function. From the right panels, under Functions, at the search box type GetXMLData. And here it is. You can have more details about the function from here. As we see here, this function needs parameters control ID, retrieved fields, controls to fill. To add the parameters, there are two ways, by the wizard, or manually. I am going to add them manually. Select the XML Connector ID. Item. Type the array that contains the name of XML fields that you want to retrieve. Here we are going to retrieve the manufacturer, model, and cost. Then type the array that contains the controls that we want to map with the retrieved fields array. Then click Save. Let's now see how it works. From the top ribbon, click on Preview. We are going to select the item by click on the search icon. OK, this is the search pop-up dialog. As you see, here are the search fields that we have in XML company file. We see also here all the data that exist in the company file, because we have selected the option Show All Data when search box is empty. In our case the data is small, I can select the item directly, but in case we have large data, we can search by item, or model, or any search field that we have here. If we uncheck the checkbox that displays all the data, the search dialog will be like this. You can make the search that you want. This XML connector control provides an excellent sorting property. The user can sort the results ascending or descending per column, by clicking on any column header in the search dialog. Let's select item. Then click on OK. As we see here, the item data have been retrieved in our form. Now let's change the query type, from searchable to a drop-down list, to represent the data in drop-down list format. Go back to the XML connector settings, and change the query type to a drop-down list. As we see here, when selecting the drop-down list query type, there are some features are enabled, like Show Default Caption. You can select it if you want to add default text at the top of the values of the drop-down list. The other feature is to select whether to execute this query, on load, or on change. If you select the execute to be on load, the system automatically creates a new rule for executing the XML query for the control. Let's preview the form and see how it works. As you see here, all the items that we have in the XML file are represented in the drop-down list. Now we want to retrieve the rest of the data for the selected item, using the GetXMLData function, and set the values to the form controls. Back to the design mode. Select the XML connector control. Create a new rule. Modify the rule name. Select rule type action, and apply the rule on change. Add your condition if the item is selected. In the action text box, first, we are going to use the setValue function. As we see here, this function needs two parameters: the control ID, which is the represent control, and the values that we are going to retrieve from the XML file, by using the GetXMLData function. Let's add the function and set the parameters. Select the control ID, manufacturer, and the value that we are going to retrieve from the XML query, by using the GetXMLData function. So again, from the right panel, Function, search for GetXMLData. As we see here, this function needs two parameters, the control ID, which represents the XML connector ID, and the XML field that wants to retrieve its value. If this parameter is empty, then it will return an array of all values of the selected record in the control. Select the control ID, item, and type the XML field manufacturer. We are going to repeat these steps for all the data that we want. Then click Save. OK, let's preview how it works. Let's select the item. And here are the item data retrieved in our form. You can use the list of checkboxes, or the radio button instead of the drop-down list. Another advanced feature of the XML Connector control is that you can create cascading XML Connector controls based on parent-child XML data source structure. We will see together how to configure the controls to read the XML data source and filter the returned data based on the selected value of the other control. First, we are going to add new XML Connector control for company name that we want to filter the data based on it. Again, from the Toolbox panel, under Integration, drag and drop the XML Connector control. Modify the XML Connector control properties. Open the control settings to connect with the XML data source. Select Library XML file and enter the site path. And select the list. Enter the item ID. Here we are going to set this path to get all parent values that represent the company's names. Type parent the primary node that you want to retrieve data in the form based on it. Select the source type to be single column source. And select distinct values. Type attribute to return all the nodes that contain a specific attribute name, type value. Select query type, drop-down list. And select show default caption. And select execute on load. OK, now the company drop-down list is ready. We are going to configure the item XML connector to retrieve all the items based on the selected company. Go back to the item XML connector control settings. And at the XPath, we are going to add the filter, as you see here, after the @ symbol, the parent value equals the company XML connector selected value. We are going to change the execute on change. And from the action controls, we are going to select company. Then click on OK. Let's preview our form now. Select the Dell company. As we see here, items data is displayed from the Dell company. Let's select another company. We just watched how it's easy to add and configure the XML connector control for SharePoint forms using Spark Forms to integrate your form with an external or internal XML data source, XML string stored in SharePoint columns, or InfoPath forms. How you can use rules to consume all the selected field values returned from the search dialog. Also, how to generate your XML query on form load, or by any control in your form. And how to create dynamic queries by sending filters from the form controls. Follow us to learn more about advances used for SharePoint and Spark Forms. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe, and if you have a comment please write it down. Thank you.